Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for the delay. This hearing of the Committee on Education of the Senate is hereby called to order. Our discussion today will pending bill before the Senate with regards to a certificate of recognition that British School is a institute of international character. A first hearing had been heard by the chair of the committee, Senator Pia Cayetano. Unfortunately, she had to leave for Zurich last week to accept an award on behalf of the Philippine government. So she asked me to temporarily chair this committee and continue with the hearings on the British School Bill. This morning, the chair would like to acknowledge for the record the presence of Senator Cynthia Villar to give us a quorum. It also would like to recognize for the record the presence of the following invitees: Mr. Simon Mann, School Head, British School, Manila. Mr. Mann is here. Mr. Trevor Lewis is not here. Mr. Simon Bewley, Chairman of the Board of Governors. Mr. Brendan Egan, Vice Chair, Board of Governors. Mr. Martin Turner, Trustee. Mr. Turner. Mr. Stein Melsbo. Am I saying that correctly? All right. Mr. Melsbo, you are on the Board of Governors. Mr. Bart Eads. Am I saying that correctly?
Senator, it is Adesh.
Adesh.
Thank you.
You Philippinized it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Member of the Board of Governors, Ms. Ann Haslam. Member of the Board of Governors, Miss Allison Henderson. Board of Governors. I did not try to pronounce your middle name. How do you say it?
It's Allison Doig Henderson.
Doig.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Josephine Melrose, Board of Governors. Thank you. Mr. Rod Peñalosa, Guidance Counselor. Mr. Ed Chua, Chairman of Shell. Mr. Ramon Del Rosario, also of Shell. Ms. Trixie Madamba. Ms. Catherine Tantoco Daniels. Ms. Fanny de Los Angeles Bautista. Ms. Jeannie Gonzalez. And Ms. Gigi Dicini. Thank you for coming.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to be excused. I have provided the quorums. I have to go to another room to preside on a farm tourism bill. So I'm glad to meet all of you.
Thank you for accommodating us today. The British School has applied for a certificate of recognition for status as an institution of international character. This committee would like to clarify the governance standard of the British School. Obviously, we all quite realize that the British School has turned out to be one of the finer secondary educations in this country. And this representation is a product of British education because I went to school in England. I took my O's and my A's. Didn't quite finish my A's because an American university accepted me after my lower sixth year. And so thank heavens I was able to move across the Atlantic Ocean to enroll in another school. There is also, do we have a representative from, yes, I'm sorry, did I mention your name, Undersecretary Albert? So we would like to recognize the presence of the Undersecretary of the Department of Education, Albert Muyot. We also would like to determine at this stage the extent of the regulatory oversight powers of the Department of Education over such private schools. There are several now here, foreign, and we want to know under what circumstances is the Department of Education required to step in order to protect the interests not only of the students but also of the parents of the students and the entire teaching staff and service staff of the schools. At this time, we would like to ask the committee secretary to administer the oath to all resource persons that we have mentioned. So would you like to stand up and take your oath?
If you wish to take your oath, raise your right hand, please. I state your name, please. Do solemnly swear to tell or confirm the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in this public proceeding. So help me God. You may now take your seats.
Thank you. Please be seated. Now, in early February, a very sad incident occurred, of which we are all aware, wherein a student took his life, and naturally the parents have come to the committee to ask why did her son and his son take his life? What triggered it? Subsequently, the school, British school, hired an IRP, or the Independent Review Panel, to take a look at the processes and procedures and rules governing the transgression which this child committed, known as plagiarism, in order to assure the parents and the students that the school will have done everything in its power to make sure that these things don't happen again. Now, please give us a response, Mr. Simon Mann or Mr. Simon Bewley. The IRP was organized roughly a month after the death of Leah Madamba. Is that correct?
Senator, I'll just look if I introduce myself, sorry, as Simon Bewley, Chairman of the Board of Governors, and thank you very much for the invitation, Senator. If I may respond without preamble to the inquiry you made. You mentioned the time taken to set up the independent review panel. The independent review panel was in fact constituted by the Council of Trustees, and we had as a board proposed an independent review. That proposal was made at our board meeting on the 12th of February. from the 16th to the 20th of February was the half-term holiday, also the Chinese New Year. School resumed on the 23rd of February. During the half-term, however, I had the opportunity to talk to the Deputy British Ambassador, who is chairman of the Council of Trustees. Can I explain a little bit?
Certainly, please.
That the Council of Trustees is the highest body. It's actually British Education, Inc., which is our legal entity registered with the Security and Exchange Commission, has 10 members. Those 10 members are 5 institutional members and 5 nominated members. The 5 institutions nominate the 5 members. The institutional members of the Council of Trustees are the British Embassy, the Australian Embassy, HSBC, the bank, Standard Chartered Bank, and Shell Exploration. The Honourable Senator will understand the British connection of all those institutions. Those 5 institutions each nominate senior members of their organizations to become members of British Education, Inc., and also to do double duty as trustees of the Council. The current members nominated by those institutions are His Excellency the Australian Ambassador, Bill Tweedell, the Deputy British Ambassador, Mr. Trevor Lewis, the head of HSBC in the Philippines, Mr. Wick Veloso. Until recently, he is now left, the head of Standard Chartered, and a very senior manager of Shell Exploration, Mr. Martin Turner, who is in attendance today. So that is really the governance of it. The Board of Governors, in fact, of the British School Manila is a standing committee of the Council of Trustees of BEI in accordance with their bylaws. And the governors of the British School comprise 12 members, of which 4 are elected and 8 are nominated. The nominations are made on recommendation by the Council of Trustees and renewed on an annual basis.
May I interrupt?
Certainly.
I heard 4 are elected, 8 are nominated.
Correct, making 12 in total. 12 governors.
The nominated governors are just appointed, that's what you mean? They're
That's
appointed
correct.
by the Council of Trustees.
That is correct.
And the nominated ones are?
The nominated ones include the chair and vice chair of the Board of Governors and other governors.
What's the difference?
I think it's historical, really, Senator. I'm going back quite a bit, but to the best of my belief and understanding, perhaps Mr. Brendan Egan, who's Vice Chair and has been on the board much longer than I, in fact, since the foundation of the school in 1976, would remember better. But my understanding is that it was the intention with the elected members of the board to increase the parent representation and interaction.
How many parents are represented in the Board of Governors?
Okay.
Out of a total of 12,
12,
you say?
yeah. I think that 8.
7 or 8
Yes,
are
8.
current parents.
You have 8 parents represented in the Board of Governors?
Yes, in the sense, Senator, that those are governors who are
Or
parents.
are they teachers who happen to have kids in school?
None of them, Senator.
None of them are.
None of them are teachers at the school.
I had a photograph of all your governors. You have a list. Would you like to submit it to the chair, please? I have it now.
Okay.
So, Diana Guild is a
Yes.
parent. Josephine Melrose represents the alumni.
Yes, also a parent.
Rena Wong, who I
Yes.
understand just resigned,
Yes, parent.
is a parent. David Gold,
Parent.
Parent.
Until recently, I think his child has already left. Oh, still. Sorry, still.
Miss Haslam is a parent.
No longer a parent.
What do you mean no longer a parent?
Was a parent previously.
Grown-up children.
Yes.
I don't understand that. What happened to her child?
No.
When you say no longer a parent, something happened to the kids.
To be absolutely clear, her children are now grown up, Senator, is what I meant to say. The children are already grown.
She what?
The children of Mrs. Haslam are already adult.
No longer having children in the school.
Yes, correct.
And Mr. Hearn,
He was a parent at the school. His children have now graduated from the school.
Mr. Egan, not a parent. Miss Henderson, parent. Mr. Ingram, parent.
Parent, yes.
Mr. Edis,
Parent.
Mr. Melsbo,
Parent.
and Mr. Bewley.
Former parent. With a personal tragedy in my own family, and I also grieve and often refer to it as BSM. It really is a school where the best interests of the children in our care are above all else. This means that the well-being, education, safety of our children, that the well-being, safety of our children, because there is all of us have to learn lessons to get better. We have been devastated by this tragedy. We all have a moral responsibility. A moral responsibility to reflect deeply within ourselves, with humility, a mission of caring. The world that was in the other was in Florida, but the cost. I'm pleased to tell everybody that the little arrived, and she is now living in the United Kingdom at school with her adopted brother. I just give that as an. We have students hold a Philippine passport. 400 students altogether. We're not a profit. When we are a not-for-profit school, we were established in 1976.
Long-time resident.
World-class international education, and existing foreign companies, but perhaps also we help to encourage a bit of investment. As I've indicated, many of our students have a Philippine heritage, and they're well placed across the world at top universities, including Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, London School of Economics, etc. And we have provided education, and you'll notice there the fact-finding investigation. Copies of those details were
Let me interrupt. You
Sir.
conducted an internal fact-finding investigation on surrounding circumstances. I committed them.
yes.
Lastly, along with Simon Bewley, extend our condolences again to the Madamba family. I think any time to the Madamba family, when a community loses one of its members, obviously it's a very traumatic period for that. I myself, my condolences obviously to the Madamba family, but he was in anything that life prior to the tragic incident on the Friday, and we have an obligation to look at, learn from, that we may learn from. We saw it as an obligation.
So you were looking into.
We saw it as an obligation.
So you were looking into.
Belief and under Senator, that's correct.
Why did you limit it to February 5?
Viewed it, the train of events up until the time Liam left the school, which was quite close to 2:20. From 2:10:20 onwards, we really have no jurisdiction over Liam, and we still have not looked into the events in Liam's last few hours from the time he left school at 2:20 until the Friday morning.
All right. All right. You may continue with your presentation, Mr. Bewley.
Thank you, Senator. Sorry, I'm not very used to this mic thing. I had more or less completed the opening statement because I've already addressed some of the points, but just for the sake of clarity and seriatim, I went on in my document, which, if I may, Senator, I would submit to the committee as a document. I'm not quite certain of the process, but if I may make it a formal document. Is that okay, Senator? Thank you. I went on in this opening statement, which I don't want to delay the committee's time, to explain the difference between the Council of Trustees and the Board of Governors, specifically stating that the Council of Trustees
that would require, if you
That she spent time with, to her leaving, time with her family in South. To her leaving, we had contact with the Madamba family, and we had endeavoured to try and arrange a meeting with myself, Mr. and Mrs. Madamba, a support person and a friend for the Madamba family, and Natalie Mann, reasonably and in depth of every school, particularly on the Thursday view panel, but also we started immediately the process of looking. But we started immediately the reflection process, looking at whether Stan had. Although we understood from the second student involved in the incident that a process which we don't really talk about punishment, we talk about a learning experience when students make bad decisions. Natalie Mann had discussed with her line manager, Mr. Brian Platts, who is with us today, exactly how she might deal with both students over the issues that
You were talking about a problem.
Mhm.
How do you define that problem?
The problem that we identified was that the student submissions both contained a significant amount of material that was from a source other than their own. It was not cited. Was it an appropriate source for citation?
You can't stop it. You can catch it, and you can warn the student, but it does happen. It does happen.
We are where students leave us in their 17th and 18th years of their lives. They tend predominantly to leave, and we know and fully that institutions, universities, an opportunity for students to understand the potential consequences both for their IB diploma, which was effectively a few months away, but also their future university life. In the essence of that and in the spirit of that, the reflection process took place, and the students were then provided an opportunity to repeat the assignment, resubmit, and have no impact whatsoever on their ability to pass their IB diploma. I would defer, if we want to go into a little bit more depth about the regulations that the IB diploma dictates, I would defer to Mr. Platts, who has a far better understanding and knowledge of the IB diploma.
Everybody in this room agrees, Mr. Mann, that plagiarism is a transgression, and a very serious one. It has to do with intellectual property rights. It is committed by stealing someone's thoughts, ideas, words, and then passing them off as your own, which is certainly a very dishonest practice. But you're right in the sense that it is the certainty of punishment and the severity of punishment that will deter plagiarism. The act itself is hard to detect, it's hard to stop, but the student has to realize that, gosh, if I get caught, I've had it. So in that sense, I agree with you, but preventing it, aside from assuring the kids that there will be certainty that you will get caught, there will be certainty that you will have to be punished, it's really difficult. I mean, we have laws against robbery and murder and all sorts of crime, but it's the certainty of punishment that helps prevent the commission of those crimes itself. I mean, give a kid a car, a new car, and you'll see him speeding down at 80 miles an hour down our freeway. But if he knows that there are policemen there who are going to catch him, suspend his license, then he's going to think twice. So that's what I'd like to comment on that. However, at this time, I'd like to give an opportunity to Mrs. Madamba to tell her story, the story of Liam, and to let all our visitors here know that there are many sides to a story, and perhaps some of them only heard one side. So let's hear your side. Trixie, turn on your microphone, please.
Senator Osmeña, I hope you don't mind, I have visuals.
All right.
Sort of like a slide presentation. Committee about my son, Liam Joseph. Tell the Senate Committee about my son, Liam Joseph Madamba. His was a cheeky sense of humor. He had simple joys like a good book or a movie, 1950s music. He liked to play D&D or Call of Cthulhu with his closest friends. In his own words, he describes his strongest quality. Introversion is not always viewed as positive. It is usually skewed as timid or shy, and the constant veil of quiet as a mere lack of things to say. But in a society where people tend to talk rather than listen, heeding the words of others allows your own opinion to be developed, more sophisticated. In the board's May 15 letter referring to February 5th, the board members wrote, "When plagiarism was identified, Mrs. Mann took the issue to her line manager, and they collectively decided on the actions to be taken. Mrs. Mann called Liam and another student for a meeting, and he was made to admit to plagiarism on his theory of knowledge, or TOK essay." Now, what kind of process did Mrs. Mann and her line manager undertake to determine this plagiarism? Why was Liam not given due process? The chance to explain himself as to whether this was deliberately done or an honest mistake on his part? And how is such a serious charge concluded without the parents involved? Before or after the meeting, we, his parents, were not informed of Liam's infraction. In the next slide, you will see the February school calendar. Liam improperly cited a paragraph taken from a website. This was his first offense on a first draft. He submitted, and if you see the calendar there, I took screenshots. He submitted this on the due date, February 2, as shown in the school calendar. Liam's mistake, improper citation, is not plagiarism because it was a first draft. The board states in their letter, the submitted work was the students' one opportunity for written feedback on this essay from their teacher. This is in accordance with IB protocols. The board steers clear of the term first draft. I want to emphasize that Liam's essay was a first draft, and he ought to have been guided and given feedback by Mrs. Mann to correct his improper citation, not condemned. Instead of teaching my son or reminding him about in-text referencing, use quotation marks, or simply rewrite the paragraph in his own words, Mrs. Mann subjected my son to humiliation and to threats. The board letter goes on to say, the plagiarism was a paragraph lifted from a model answer lifted online, which could not be rectified by quotation marks. Where did the board members get this ridiculous statement? In all my 25 years as a teacher, I have never encountered such a ludicrous pronouncement. How could placing a passage in quotation marks in order to quote it exactly not rectify his mistake? On a first draft, how could the board make such a sweeping conclusion when a few lines later in their letter, they partially quote from an uncited IB document using quotation marks? And then Mr. Mann in his May 21 letter declares fact. Sadly, beyond any doubt, serious plagiarism was committed. If it indeed was so grave, then I repeat, why were we, his parents, not informed of Liam's infraction before or after Mrs. Mann met with him on February 5th? Mrs. Mann then made Liam write a letter of apology, and to this the board refers. Student reflection on both their positive contributions to the school and their poor personal choices is a key component in the way we educate our students at BSM, both in primary and secondary school. Liam was made to write a letter of apology addressed to the entire student body. Kindly, next slide, please. When you are asked to address a letter of reflection to the whole school community, how is this introspective? Why was he not supervised during this part of the process? And afterwards, why did Mrs. Mann not sit down with Liam to go over the points he wrote to help him reflect better? This letter was not reflection but public humiliation. Let me make this clear. This letter writing exercise was punitive. This form of public flogging is within the reflection process that BSM claims to be so proud of. Did Mrs. Mann explain to Liam that it was actually going to be delivered to the audience, or was it just a make-believe audience to further increase the reflective process? If it was a make-believe audience, then isn't it just the most cruel form of punishment a teacher can give a child who does not know better? That letter of apology, a photocopy, and not the real one, a photocopy, was given to us by Mr. Mann more than 2 months after his death. Liam used words and phrases like, my unending selfishness, 1,000 shades of darkest emotions. He used the word ashamed twice. Had I seen that letter as a mother, I would have known that a red flag was up. Had a caring educator read this letter, she or he would have known a red flag was up, and that the child was going through seriously alarming emotional distress. Mrs. Mann did not bother to read my son's letter. There's a research professor in America, and her name is Dr. Brené Brown. She maintains that shame, which she defines as the intensely painful feeling that we are unworthy of love and belonging, is lethal, deadly, and it can happen in an instant. She says that the cure for shame is to show empathy, to take a student's perspective, stay out of judgment, and connect with people and what they're feeling. Why could Mrs. Mann not show Liam kindness and compassion? Empathy is so inherent in our profession as teachers, in our vocation as parents. Empathy, compassion. BSM's reflection policy, which both the COT version of the report and the original IRP report state, is intended to encourage students not to repeat academically dishonest behavior, and which BSM is so confident of. This reflection policy caused my son to spiral down a deep pit and choose to commit suicide. If Mrs. Mann had indeed revealed to Liam that his reflective process of letter writing to the whole student body was just a make-believe technique to get him to better reflect, then why would Liam come home and write this letter to us and then disappear? Liam's words wallow in desperation and complete shame after he was threatened, humiliated, pushed to the edge by Mrs. Mann. Both letters show the same emotional state. I cannot begin to imagine the indescribable anguish and hopelessness that he went through, that no child should ever go through. We choose schools with the trust that the adults they spend a greater part of their day with will continue with the same nurturing that we do at home. Mrs. Mann sent my son home with absolutely no support system. My son came home unusually quiet, his spirit broken by her condemnation. He wrote a suicide note, a simple continuation of the reflection process he was subjected to a few hours before in school by Mrs. Mann. Now, going back to the board's May 15 letter, it states, a reflection in the form of a reflective letter and a resubmission of the assignment were the consequences of plagiarism. Next slide, please. Here is Mrs. Mann's email to Liam and his classmate, which she sent after the meeting. Rubbing salt to the wound she had inflicted on both students, she did not ask for a resubmission, as the board claims. She was to assign them a new prescribed TOK essay topic the following Monday, and have them write a new TOK essay under timed conditions, 2 hours, 2:30 to 4:30 in her office. Mrs. Mann clearly violated IB guidelines. Students are given weeks to do wide reading, research, and in-depth writing on a prescribed topic of their choice. TOK essay writing is not a timed test. the board members should have checked their facts first, or at least studied IB guidelines pertaining to the TOK essay before you wrote that May 15 letter. Mere minutes after Liam died, 3 hours after jumping off a 6-story car park building, Mr. Mann sought me out to ask me whether the line "fell off a building" was appropriate to use in his email that he was planning to send out to the school community. He was also more concerned about the mental welfare of Liam's classmates. The board did not deem it necessary to call for an emergency meeting when Liam died. An investigative panel, the IRP, was put together more than 1 month after Liam's death. The board, in its May 15 letter, gives its full support to Natalie Mann and the leadership under Simon Mann. To the mothers and fathers in this room, put yourselves in my shoes. In the face of such lack of compassion, stonewalling, insensitivity, and inaction on the part of the school administration under Simon Bewley and Simon Mann, what would you do? What would you do? My family and I asked for the IRP report on March 27th. However, the Council of Trustees Chairman Lewis had emailed me saying there are some factual inaccuracies which are now being ironed out. My husband and I met with Mr. Mann on April 13th. He could not explain to us why he did not put Mrs. Mann on preventive suspension. He couldn't explain why he allowed her to leave the country before the investigation started. He could not produce the report. He said the report was still with the Council of Trustees. Why did the Council of Trustees take so long to release the original IRP report? We were sent the COT version of the IRP report on April 17th. The IRP disowned this report during the week of May 5th, when the chairman of the panel, Mr. Ed Chua, issued a press statement. The original IRP report was then renamed the IRP Original Source Report by Mr. Bewley when he finally made it available to the BSM community on May 21st. To this day, BSM has not sent me or my family a copy of the original IRP report. I urge the editors of the IRP report to come forward and be identified to personally explain the alterations they made. My family and I demand to know their motives behind editing this report. Why did you remove the name of my son from the original report? I appeal to the Senate committee to ensure that measures and safeguards be installed to protect students and to prevent similar occurrences like what Liam encountered. The school needs a transparent, responsible leadership and processes that protect the rights of students, that encourage educators to deal with students with sympathy and proper guidance appropriate to their age. There is a Spanish saying that goes, "Estar al pie del cañón," stand strong and stay on your feet. I remind myself that because this is the fight of my life. I can and will be the brave soldier handling that cannon. And I heed the words of St. John Paul II, who said, "Freedom consists in not doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought." My family and I remain steadfast in fighting for the truth, so that we can achieve some measure of peace, light, and closure. Thank you, Senator Osmeña, and thank you, Senator Bongbong, and Senator Gingona, for being with us today.
The Chair would like to recognize the presence of Senator Bongbong Marcos. Thank you for coming, Senator.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Would you like to propound questions?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Let me just begin by saying I am a product of a British education, so much so that presently it is an education that I appreciated so much and has helped me in my life, and so much so that my three sons are presently in the UK. 2 of my sons went through British school. So if there is any supporter of the British school here in Manila, it would be me. But I'm also a parent, and I cannot listen to this story without thinking, there but for the grace of God go my sons. So I suppose I do not want to I let too much emotion come into these proceedings. And so let me just ask a very simple question. Mr. Mann, what happened here? What happened here? How was a young boy pushed to such an extent that he felt psychologically unable to continue with his life? How did this happen? And why all this confusion about the report? The non-appearance of the report after it had been done, the abridging, the editing of the report. Now I am shocked to find out that the mother has yet to get a copy of the report from the school. So let me keep it open-ended that way, so allow you to explain what happened. Why did Liam commit suicide? Why did he kill himself? How was it? What were the circumstances that preyed upon him, that made him feel that he could not go on while he was attending your school? And why was the handling of the report this way? And where is Mrs. Mann? Why is she run away? You cannot fault us for thinking that. So please, hopefully you can provide some answers to these questions.
Thank you, Senator. I'm not in a position I can talk to you about the IRP report. The IRP report was commissioned by the Council of Trustees. It has been under their purview, and I'm sure that Mr. Turner will be able to, will be able to answer questions relating to the report. I've spent some time describing the process the school went through to deal with Liam and a second student over the same issue of the submission of a theory of knowledge essay that contravened academic honesty rules and laws. I would request at this time to ask Mr. Platts to talk to you about both the conversation he had with Natalie Mann prior to dealing with the two students and the regulations to which we are held by the IB diploma. He's a far more knowledgeable member of staff at the school about these things than I. So if I could defer to Mr. Platts for at least that part of it, and then I will continue to answer your question when he's completed his response.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, if you would allow the gentlemen who are
Certainly.
to speak.
May we have the name? And we will
It's Mr. Brian Platts.
would he step forward, join us at the resource persons table, and take his oath? Yes, sir. Would you identify yourself, please? Speak it to the mic.
Would you like to take your oath?
Yes, sir.
First, identify yourself.
Good morning. My name is Brian Platts. I'm the one of the deputy head teachers. I'm responsible, among other things, for Key Stage 5, which is the IB program.
Please stand up
Would you stand, take the oath?
and raise your right hand. I, mention your name, please, do solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
to tell or confirm the truth,
to tell or confirm the truth,
the whole truth and nothing but the truth
the whole truth, and nothing but
in this public proceeding,
in
this public proceeding,
this public proceeding.
so help me God.
So help me God.
You may take your seat.
Mr. Platt, you may proceed.
Okay. Would you like me to, first of all, discuss my discussion with Mrs. Mann before she spoke with Liam?
Perhaps what would be more appropriate, let us do it chronologically and start with, I suppose, the suspicion that plagiarism had been committed, and what actions you took to correct that or to punish that plagiarism.
Okay, with all due respect, I wouldn't use the word punish. That's not a word that I, as an educator, or as at the British school, readily use. But I do understand why you used it. On Wednesday the 4th of February, Natalie approached me with news that a student had looked like they had plagiarized a TOK essay. For the TOK essay, students are allowed one draft. After that draft, they are then given feedback from their TOK teacher. They would then be given a few weeks to act upon that draft and submit their final TOK essay. At this point in my discussions with Mrs. Mann, this student was not Liam. As her line manager, she came to speak to me about what we should do. Because of the IB regulations, and if you allow me, the IB advise schools in their policies about plagiarism, and this is what they say. Schools should not view plagiarism as a trivial offence with only minor consequences. It must be viewed as a serious academic transgression with a community attitude that shows no tolerance and imposes severe penalties when it is discovered. As a school, and you have mentioned, or it has been mentioned this morning, that we undergo a process of reflection. We believe life is about learning. I'm sure everyone in this room has made errors and misjudgments and mistakes in their lives. I think it's the job of us as teachers and educators to help young people understand those transgressions and to learn from them. That's why we have a policy of reflection. Also, we have a policy of reflection because the IB Learner Profile tells us that. One of the 10 attributes is reflection. We also have something called learning power, which, if your children went through BSM, will be very well acquainted with. The IB, as I stated, sees this as a very serious offence. So the first thing that we talked about was that the students should be made aware that if this was passed to the IBO, it would be serious, and the possible consequences of that would be a failure to attain their diploma. We agreed that this student, and I'll remind you at this point it wasn't Liam, would redo another essay. As I mentioned before, the first essay is given feedback. So the essay that Liam would have been asked to have done would have been an essay which he would have then got feedback on. That would not have been the final essay. But that's another issue. This student would be given an opportunity to disclose any other incidences of plagiarism. My role, and I think the school's role, is to protect our students. As you rightly said, plagiarism is common. It's not something that obviously is condoned, but it's common. And really our job as schools is to try and prevent that before it gets to that stage. And we have things in place to educate and to train students about what is academic honesty and what is academic dishonesty. In fact, we had 2 sessions in September and October of that previous year on academic honesty, and one specifically on reference writing. On referencing. but one of my main points of the discussion with Mrs. Mann was, look, I want to make sure that this student hasn't plagiarised with other pieces of work that have already been submitted. So I asked Mrs. Mann to give them an opportunity to disclose of any other forms of plagiarism. Because as I said before, I see our job as really being that buffer and a protection for students in terms of making grave mistakes to do with academic dishonesty. And as students in...
Mr. Platt, may I?
Sure.
Yes,
Of course. This sounds to me like a red herring. I think the committee knows how common plagiarism is, as you yourself admitted. I mean, gosh, ever since I was in grade school, I would hear classmates, and I myself, once a year maybe, ask a classmate during the exam, what's the answer to number 6? Or somebody else asked me what my answer was to number 5. So this is part of your values formation process, which attends any school. Every school has got to be able to teach their children, their students, what is the right thing to do and what are the wrong things to do. And our curiosity stems from the fact that you tend to focus you here. I think that the committee would like to know, how did the teacher handle this? Did she overreact? Did she push a child, barely 18, to the brink of jumping to his death from a 6-story parking lot building? And that's what you should have identified and focused on. Now, I understand that the penalty for plagiarism on a first offense is a 15-minute detention. Am I correct? It's not. What is it?
Excuse me. We have a system for sanctions in the school. We deal with any transgression on an individual matter. Once you get into the IB, it really is a partnership with students, speaking to students, finding out what happened. Even as the IB state in their documentation, they have different sanctions for different types of academic dishonesty. There's a difference between missing a quotation than between taking something into an exam.
I'm not talking about the IB. I'm talking only about British school. What are the penalties?
Well, again, we have a standard set of guidelines to help teachers, mainly at Key Stage 3.
Mr. Platt, you don't answer my question. It's very simple. What is the penalty for plagiarism or attempted plagiarism in British school?
Excuse me, Senator, I'd like to read you a section.
Yes, please.
Okay, so a section from our family handbook. Excuse me. This is directly from our family handbook. Plagiarism is attempting to pass off your own work as someone else's, and within the school it is viewed an extremely serious offence. Students who are suspected of plagiarism are reported to the primary or senior heads. If they have been found to have cheated, are likely to be suspended.
Could you speak into the mic, Mr. Mann? And bring it closer to you.
I do apologise. Where did I get to before? Do I need to start again? No. Okay. If they have found to have cheated, they are likely to be suspended, and they will gain no marks for the piece of work in question. If the assignment was for an external assessment or moderation, for an example, the IB Diploma Theory of Knowledge essay, the possible consequences is that the students will fail the entire course. So that indicates the extreme end that Mr. Platts is referring to of the way in which plagiarism we dealt with. In
this particular instance, Liam committed, I think, what lawyers would call attempted plagiarism.
I think it would be fair to say that we view any submitted document that leaves a child's hand or a student's hand to a teacher as a submitted document, and therefore we have to treat it as plagiarism itself.
Attempted in the sense that plagiarism does not really become a crime until it is published. In other words, You have a very brilliant lawyer behind you, and he must be a parent. His name is Attorney Ayo Bautista. Maybe he can make clear certain things to the committee. So Ayo, would you like to join the resource person, since you're already here? Oh, you're a lawyer for a British school. Well, that's great. You've got the best lawyer in the country. The committee will take Attorney Bautista's presence as a hostile witness. But nonetheless, we shall listen to him. Now, Attorney, plagiarism in civil law becomes a crime when it is published, right? When it's made public.
I think there's a difference between violations of the copyright law and the intellectual property law and the definition of plagiarism in an academic context. I think there's a distinction,
all right,
Mr. Senator. And it's the school, really, which determines whether or not plagiarism occurs within its rules, because the school is a private institution, and when the parent brings his child to the school, they submit themselves to the standards and rules of that school, the values of that school.
Agreed. All right. And in this particular instance, you know, I just remember a little of my criminal law where you've got attempted murder, frustrated murder, and consummated murder.
Yes, Your Honor.
And in this particular instance, regardless of whether it is a regulation or it is a part of the civil or criminal code, it's not yet consummated.
Well, if I may.
It's not yet final, it's just a draft.
No,
diba?
attempted means the perpetrator has initiated the criminal acts but was not able to complete all the acts. Frustrated means the perpetrator was able to complete all the criminal acts, but because of an intervention beyond his control, he was not able to complete the act. For example, I shoot at you and you have a vest.
Frustrated.
No, it's frustrated, Your Honor. Now, if all my acts were performed and I was able to consummate the offense, it's a consummated act. In this instance...
If I die, it's consummated. If I live, it's still frustrated.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So, in this instance, if the school determines that if a first draft is deemed to be a consummated act, that's it. And my understanding is, correct me, Mr. Mann, if I'm wrong, a first draft is deemed by the school to constitute plagiarism, and that the students were well aware of it.
All right. I really did. Thank you so much for your elucidation, Attorney. Please stay there because we will refer to you, and the committee will pay your legal fees if you answer in our favor.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps we could return to just the specifics on Liam's case. From Mr. Mann, what you just read to us as to what were the punishments for plagiarism as laid out, we do not hear, I did not hear anything about writing a letter of apology to the school, to yourself, to the teachers, but in the affidavit of Mrs. Mann, that is the procedure that she said. She said that having found that there was plagiarism, I explained to both the children that what would happen next. They would be required to write a letter in which they will apologize. How was this procedure established? That should there be plagiarism, there will be a letter written. Is it from the IB guidelines, or is it specific to BSM?
Good morning, Senators.
Good morning.
Good morning, Senators.
Good morning.
The process of reflection is something that goes along through all the levels of the school. Letter writing is quite common among our children. So, for instance, my 5-year-old son had hurt another little girl, and the consequence of that was to write a letter. And I think by writing that letter, the child sees that they've hurt somebody. And the funny thing is because of that, whenever I get mad at my children, oftentimes if I come home, I see an apology letter at my desk. So that's a very much a British school reflection policy and reflection process that goes on from 5 years old onwards, and you will probably see a lot of parents here who would attest to that.
So it is not a specified procedure from IB as a guideline. It is something that BSM has chosen to adopt as a matter of school policy. I quite understand. I wrote many so-called blue papers in my time in school, and this is the kind of thing that the English school seems to. So again, but it is not something that is a guideline from IB. It is something that a policy that the BSM adopted.
No, it's not a guideline from IB. I think Brian indicated, and I've indicated earlier, mistakes frequently, as we know, are possibly our best learning opportunities. I suppose one of our fears is students leave school having made no mistakes, and when they face mistakes in later life, they don't know how to handle them. What we try and do when a student makes a mistake is we try and find ways in which they are able to rectify the mistakes that they have made. We see it as incredibly important in the process of building independence. As I described earlier, our students are not just leaving their school, but they are leaving their families. My daughter at the moment is in New Zealand, and I hope, as all parents whose children are away, that we've done everything we can to prepare her for any difficulties or problems that she faces. I think really we're alluding to what the intention of the process was. I think there is no doubt, if you read Liam's letter of apology, that he was deeply affected by writing the letter of apology. It was never intended to create humiliation or hurt. It was intended, as Mr. Platts has discussed, as a process of reflecting on something that would or could in future have a significant impact on his academic well-being, either as a student at BSM or as a student moving forward to university.
Yes, that's understood. But let me go to the particulars, the circumstances surrounding the actual letter writing of Liam. What happened? He was taken into a room. Was he locked into it? Okay. Did he stay there for 6 hours, half an hour? What exactly happened?
Now you have Mrs. Mann's.
I have it, yes, in front of me. Okay. Yes.
Obviously this happened a number of months ago, and if I do not get it exactly right, you can possibly correct me. Mrs. Mann initially spoke to both students, and if you look at the evidence both of the Isabella Ver's statement and Mrs. Mann's statement, prior to even discussing why they were in the room, the students self-identified that they had committed plagiarism, and they admitted openly to the fact they'd committed plagiarism, and before they went into the room they realised that they had actually plagiarised from exactly the same site and exactly the same piece of work that was posted on the blog. So there really wasn't a discussion as to whether the students had plagiarised or not. The students then sat in that room and discussed together the consequences or potential consequences of plagiarism. They were then left in, one child was left in Mrs. Mann's office, the other student was left in the adjacent office. Mrs. Mann left them for, I don't know the exact period of time, but went to complete the teaching that she was involved with, returned. She returned to Liam's room. Liam submitted the letter to Mrs. Mann. There wasn't really much of a conversation. Liam was aware that he needed to speak to his parents that evening, and Mrs. Mann would follow up. Mrs. Mann's statement clearly states that both students were told that letter was for her, and it was a letter that remained between her and the writer of that letter. There is and would never be a situation where we would publicly humiliate a child where we would even share that letter in a way that would humiliate the child or cause humiliation to a child. It's not part of what we
What
do.
happened to the letters? Or and never mind this specific case. What happens to such letters that are written in reflection?
In the normal course of events, they would be read by the teacher, and they would just be used as a reflection process and moved on from.
They would be filed away, not to be seen by
They probably,
anyone
to
else.
be honest with you, they probably wouldn't even get to a point where they were filed. In many cases, they would just be put to one side, and that would be the end of that process, because it's not really designed to be punitive. It's designed to be a personal moment that allows you to reflect on what you've done.
And so after the letter was written, there was now the requirement that with a note that was sent to both children that they would have to then email home. The parents would be emailed. They would have to see their parents in the evening of that day, and furthermore that they will spend Monday afternoon working on your TOK essays under time, etc., etc. So that's the next. That's what happened next.
Yeah, there are a few things that happened there, and I'm just trying to reflect back. Yes, they would have time to replan and resubmit an essay. The letters were collected first from Liam and secondly from the second. Sorry, I apologise. I've kind of got lost in the narrative and have forgotten the question. Could you repeat the question you asked?
Very simple. What happened next after the letters had been written? I see here from the affidavit of Mrs. Mann, there is a communication to both children that an email will be sent to their parents, and that they would have to speak to their parents at some point. And furthermore, that the following Monday they would be working on their TOK essay.
That is correct. So Liam provided his essay to Mrs. Mann, and he proceeded to spend the rest of the day at school. I believe he left the office at about 10 o'clock, continued with lessons through the day, and left school at the end of day. Isabella was upset, and Mrs. Mann spent time talking to her because of her upset, and calming her down and reminding her that it's a mistake. She's got an opportunity to rectify it. It's something she can move on from. So the two students were not treated in exactly the same manner. However, Mrs. Mann was just responding to the needs of a student. Had Liam expressed concern at that time, he would have received exactly the same type of counselling and support.
Well, clearly he was in need of more counsel and support, because the end result of all of this was that he took a much more drastic action than the other student. But be that as it may, could you? I mean, you are an educator. You have been an educator and been dealing with young men and women for your career. What happened here? What could have possibly pushed Liam to such an extreme psychological state that he would take his own life?
I personally can't answer that question. I can see the anxiety that Liam demonstrated in the situation he was in when I read his letter, but I think that I have no idea and would be unable to answer exactly what was going on in Liam's mind, what issues he was facing, how he was dealing with the situation. I think it would be fair to say we did a reasonably extensive investigation. We talked to teachers that taught Liam for the rest of the day. We talked to his friends, and they would concur that there were no...
Mr. Mann, but that was after the fact. Surely, as the education administration and the educators of the school, you should have caught this. You should have known that he was in a high risk situation, and that he had been put in a very stressful situation, which he evidently. How could this have gone? I mean, in a school setting, you run into the children how many times a day? Surely something must have indicated that he was in severe distress.
I would completely concur with the Madamba family. Liam presented as a student who was quiet, well-liked, academically able, functioning well within his year group. There were absolutely no indications running up to the day, nor on the day, that writing a letter of apology in this way would have any really adverse impact on him. I think that we're a small school. We're not a large school, and our teachers know our students well. We have identified a number of students in the year group and had identified prior to this day who were what we would describe high-risk students. When high-risk students or medium-risk students come to our attention, then the process that Mrs. Mann went through with Brian Platts is something that would bring that up, and we would deal with things appropriately to allow that student to be able to work within the parameters of reflection and rectification. In this case, there was no indication for us that Liam, either running up to nor after the writing of the letter and the leaving Mrs. Mann's office, he finished his day in a reasonably normal way. His classmates said he was maybe a little quieter. His teacher said he contributed in the way he normally does. Someone described him as being a little more sarcastic, but there was certainly nothing there that would have indicated that he was as anxious and as upset as it became apparent he was later.
I'm just going over the actual letter that Liam wrote, and it's clear that he was in anguish. Either this is a purely jokey, sarcastic letter, or he was truly in anguish. Yeah. And the words that he uses and the emphasis that he puts on those words seems to indicate that he was practically berating himself rather than anyone else. It is kind of psychological self-flagellation. That is what I'm reading here. Unless, again, it was all a joke to him, but apparently it was not. He was a serious boy. So how could he have gotten into this psychological state? Because when you read this, I would, if a student of mine or a relative of mine, a nephew, or even my son would write such a letter, I would have to sit him down for a very long time and really go through every single word, because it would worry me that the psychological state that they were in was so precarious. How again? My yes, of course, Miss Trixie Madamba.
Senator, the teacher had the same effect. It wasn't just Liam. It wasn't just on Liam. She had the same effect. She had done or said something in that one-on-one meeting which we will never know about. The other student became upset. That's why she had to, pacify her. And then she came over to the ER the next day and had told me that when she had gotten home, she was thinking suicidal thoughts. And her mother was also there at the ER, and she said that the daughter was out of character, and she had to end up slapping her to make her go back to her senses. So the effect of Mrs. Mann,
the other student was hysterical.
Two, yes.
Because if you say that she had to sort of shake her back into...
Yes, my son just turned inwardly.
But it seems to be that was in his character, that he was a very pensive and quiet young man.
The other child was able to release it. That's how the parents found out that she had that meeting.
Did he come to you at any point and say, or did you notice anything coming back from school that he had locked himself in his room, or refused to speak about the incident, or just something different from his usual return from school?
We picked him up at 2:45, and then past 3 when we were getting off the car, I saw his face. It was unusually drawn and long and sad. I said, Liam, are you okay? And he said,
so you did notice something different?
Yes. Oh. And then he said, I'm okay, Mom. I just need to take a nap. And then my husband and I went off on our errands. Liam prepared merienda for his younger siblings, and then past 5 o'clock, he just said to them, bye. And then he disappeared without a cell phone, without any money. He just up and left. So he had disappeared for close to 14 hours.
So in your view, what had happened? What had happened to Liam from the time that he was ordinary, he was going about his daily business, daily work, to the point that he felt that he had to leave his home and take his own life?
You know, that morning, February 5, he was his usual calm and this his usual self. He had asked my husband to teach him how to shave. A few weeks before, he was telling us about, you know, that he would be able to apply for scholarships, that he wanted to wait for his IB grades to come out, and in the meantime, go on internships with his best friends, maybe apply to Greenpeace. And then he texted me that morning, said, Mom, please don't forget to buy hair wax and facial cleanser with the last of my Christmas money. That was 500 pesos. Then he decided, my younger son said, Mom, he left his phone. Said, Mom, and she told me what had happened in the meeting. And then I emailed Mrs. Mann, and I said, what happened in that meeting? You know, a mother's gut tells me that something happened in that meeting to cause my son to disappear. She answered, 6 a.m., February 6. And then she says, I can give you a copy of the thread. And then she says, she ends her email with, oh, well, you know, she starts off with, oh, I'm so sorry. And she ends with, I will email Liam's mother. I am Liam's mother. I'm emailing you. And that was her response. And then so I emailed her back. And then I said, I am certain that your meeting has a direct connection with what he did. I am certain. She emails back and completely avoids the issue. And then I said I demanded to meet with her. That I was going to go that morning to the school because she needed to explain to me what she had done to my son. And then she didn't email. By 9 a.m., shortly before 9 a.m., she said, okay, I'll wait for you in school. And then by 9 a.m., I said, I'm here in the ER. My son has extensive injuries. I cannot go to the school to meet you. That is the kind of person she is.
And did you have any contact with her after that?
No, she emailed me after the memorial in BSM, February 12, only to say my deepest condolences. I read it, so I sent it to a good friend of mine, and I asked her, could you read it for me? Is there any indication that maybe she's trying to reach out? Or maybe none. There was nothing like, would you like to set up a meeting? Would you like to meet and talk?
To this day, you, the parent, does not know what exactly happened at that meeting between Mrs. Mann and Liam that evidently pushed him into this state that he felt he had to take his own life. We don't know.
We don't know.
There has never been a blow-by-blow account, as it were, of that.
No, sir.
This is critical because, and Mr. Mann, Mrs. Mann's departure, was it sudden? Because it looks like she's avoiding explaining the circumstances that led to Liam's suicide. Her leaving the country is not exactly indicative of a clean conscience, but then maybe I'm a cynic in that regard. But you have to understand that why, if it had been a simple, ordinary sequence of events that happened all the time in school but went awry this time, Why has she never explained to the family what actually happened? I would have gone in and said verbatim on 12:05, I did this, I said these things, etc., 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 to explain that it was not my doing that caused all of this. Why did she leave? And why was she never, beyond the affidavit, why did she never taken the opportunity to explain the precise circumstances that happened? Then even then, maybe we could say that wasn't it. It was something else. But up to this day, the family cannot figure out what happened here, and her what seems to be rapid departure from the country does not help things at all.
In answer to a series of questions, Mrs. Mann remained in the country until the 4th of March, some 3 weeks after the incident. She spoke to a number of people, including her lawyer, explaining her actions on that day. We
spoke to many, including her
lawyer.
Why did she feel she had to speak to a lawyer?
She was given advice that she should need to leave an affidavit if she was going away, and that was required and requested.
Were you that lawyer? No? Okay.
I'll go back. We did attempt to arrange a meeting with Mr. and Mrs. Madamba and Mrs. Mann. We had some correspondence over that, myself, with Mrs. Madamba in particular. We were unable to arrange the meeting. The venues that we were trying to decide on were not agreed to by Mrs. Mann, and the venue that was suggested by the school, a venue outside school, was not agreed to by Mr. and Mrs. Madamba. We then went into half-term break. We returned. Through this time, there had been a significant amount of press and social media coverage. Mrs. Mann's name had been put out into the media. There were pictures, albeit them slightly blurred, of her on television. She was feeling very vulnerable. She has a young family, and when she returned to school after half-term break, she didn't feel that she could remain at school. She didn't feel comfortable with her children going to school, and it was recommended that she leave to spend time with her family, which she did. I would go back to...
all right, the circumstances of her departure. Did she tell you what happened, or did she tell any of her colleagues in BSM what happened in the interim, in the time that the plagiarism was discovered, until the time that the letter was written, after that, etc., leading up to finally the tragedy that occurred of Liam taking his own life?
The answer to that question is yes. As described, soon after the incident, as soon as the following week, we began our own internal review of what had happened, trying to ascertain the facts. Mrs. Mann was spoken to and interviewed, and I'm sorry, I'm missing a piece of paper, and it was a few months ago. Brian, was it you or was it someone else that sat with Mrs. Mann?
I'm sorry, just as a matter of, we please address the chair.
I apologise, Mr. Chair.
Just for order's sake.
Sorry, I do apologise. So I'm just trying to find a document that describes who interviewed who and who those interviews were reviewed by. But we interviewed Mrs. Mann the following week. We also understood from an email that Isabella Versa, I shouldn't be naming names, the other student had sent to Mr. and Mrs. Madamba, and also statements she had made to her fellow students, and then following a statement she made to the school. So there was a corroboration between Mrs. Mann's version of events, which you will see on your affidavit, and the other student involved events. I would go back to the issue of the letter and the anxiety that Liam obviously demonstrated. Part of that review was really to look at anything that we could have done differently or would do differently in the future. And there is no doubt in my mind that, and it will be and is going to be practice of the school, we've got very clear processes for reflection that we are going to share with families. So we identify it not just as a process of apology, although a letter of apology is quite a regular tool used by many schools, but also that teachers engage in reading or listening to the student's reflection to ensure that any information that that teacher may require, in this case, as has been stated, Mrs. Mann did not read that letter. I obviously cannot speak on behalf of Mrs. Mann, but I can speak as an educator, and we would concur with your view that had that letter been read, we would have definitely gone and found Liam, discussed how he was feeling, looked at how we could better support him, and make sure that he would move through the process, learn from his mistake, and continue with his academic career.
To get back to the question, as far as Mrs. Mann's recounting of the narrative of the events leading up to Liam leaving home and eventually taking his life, what did she say happened? You said that she did say, and she did speak to you and her other colleagues about this, and what was her narrative? What did she say happened?
She said that she met with the students together. They realised prior to the conversation that they were there about plagiarism. She talked to them together about the consequences of their actions and the potential consequences moving forward, both with their progress at BSM and also their progress beyond BSM. Was
it a heated discussion? Would they sit down quietly and have a quiet conversation? Or was either of the children jumping up and down, screaming and shouting? Were they being berated? The character, what happened in there, the words that were said are even less important than the tone in which they were said. That's what we are trying to ascertain. Because, again, it cannot be denied that Liam was pushed to a severe point, to an extreme point, so extreme that he could not handle it any longer. And he felt that he had to take his own life. How did we get to that point? When we bring our children to your school, we leave their health, their safety, their psychological balance in your hands. And that is why this occurred while they were attending your school. How did that psychological balance, how did that health and safety be so compromised that we ended up in this situation?
I can't answer that question. I was not in the room. My understanding is it would not have been raised voices. There would have been no berating. It would have probably been quite a stern conversation because the situation was one of gravity. There would have been no berating. It would have probably been clarity moving forward, and we aren't sat in a situation like this where we don't know exactly what happened in a room. This was not in itself an issue that was leading to suspension or leading to really dire consequences, and therefore Mrs. Mann, as she would have done on a number of occasions in the 3.5 years at BSM, would have dealt with students who had transgressed, who had made mistakes. She would have dealt with them in the way that we expect her to, which is through reflection and a process of being able to rectify their issues. Evidence in a manner that complaints about her. This is obviously an issue that has turned our eyes and many people's eyes to what went on in that room. As far as we understand that room, what went on in that room, as far as we understand, nothing else the students were, for want of a better opportunities to respond. They were asked to self-identify issue. That's the limit of my understanding about what went on in that room.
We have the affidavit, and we have the narrative that she had, what she had explained to you, and perhaps her other, what she had explained to you, and perhaps her other, what happened. There is a this. How did we get from that beginning to this terrible, terrible end is what we are trying to do. Should there is something that can potentially happen again? Is it something that we should do something about? Again, you can... Yes, please do so.
Liam was never referred to my guidance. He was never under my care because he never displayed any type of behavior that would deem to be red flags.
Did you know Liam well?
I knew him, but I didn't know him well enough.
So well.
I was a mental health clinician in America, and successfully, well, in IB is probably much elevated among our students. But usually, someone who contemplates on suicide would have already had a pre-existing or early onset of some type of mental health issue.
Yes, but you say that he was never referred to you, so we can presume from that there were no, at least in school, indications that he had such thoughts in his head and that he
none that would have been diagnosed or undiagnosed. But that doesn't mean
none that would have been
diagnosed or undiagnosed medically or psychologically, but that does not mean that there is no pre-existing or there's no predisposition to any type of psychological disorder.
Miss Trixie.
I'm not referring to Liam's case in this particular case.
Yeah, well, let's stay with Liam's case because that's what we're here for. Miss Madamba, did he have suicidal tendencies? Did he try to take his life, or even, you know, what they say is as a cry for help? Is this something that he would threaten to do, or his friends would tell you that he was thinking about, that sort of thing?
No, not at all. His friends were very defensive. They defended him because, you know, talk had been going around the first few days after Liam died, which really distressed me and my family because word was going around in the school that Liam had a history of mental illness.
Did you ever felt the need to consult a psychiatrist or a child psychologist because you felt that he was somehow, you know, having trouble in one way or another?
No, we have never.
You were worried for his own, that he might hurt himself. Did he ever hurt himself?
No, no.
Did he ever say he would hurt himself, even in anger or in deep depression?
No.
Never.
It was then that a friend of mine had sent me, my friend was offended when the head of senior school had sent out in the weekly newsletter, you know, guidelines about detecting mental illness a week after Liam died. I think that was February, and had a history of depression or mental illness. I had an email blasted out to all the parents to try to what kind of a person he was.
Could he possibly have been going through something else?
And he was.
Could he possibly have been going through something else not related to school? You know, at 17, right? These are much priorities. So what they consider like hugely and life-ending, it's not the...
And then he said, after I'm done with all these things, you know, it's a bit stressful, but, you know, I can do it. Things will be lighter. And, you know, it was also because of the schedule of the IB.
But standard.
Through the IB diploma program. And they understand that it's a very the IB diploma program. And they understand that it's a very
but maybe now we can ask what can the school, can BSM do to maybe, like we say, we should have read the letter, we should have, what do you think, what changes should you institute so that this kind of thing could, well, I suppose you can never guarantee 100%, but at least do a better job. The non-reading of the letter, I think, is something that could have been handled better. Again, because I think anyone who reads the letters would say that there's something more going on here than just an apology or just a reflective sort of exercise.
Yeah, I would completely concur with that, and I would just like to say the school's actions post Liam's death were completely focused on the safety of the students within the school. And I do apologise to the Madamba family if they were misinterpreted as us suggesting that there was an issue with Liam's mental health. I suppose if we talk about what keeps me awake at night, and I have a son who's 15, and unfortunately young men are the highest risk group of suicide. I think it's 15 to 24, is the concept of normalisation and contagion. So the very first parent forum we had, I think we had, and rightfully and understandably, an incredible level of anxiety in the school. And I think, as you've described, Senator, there by the grace of God go we. I think we all
again, is Mrs. Mann going to return?
Could allow me to finish. Sorry,
Is Mrs. Mann going to return to the Philippines at some point?
At this stage, she's resigned. If she returns to the Philippines, it will be under her own volition.
Okay, I'm sorry. Please continue.
I was going to say, I think we all walked into our children's room and took a good, hard look and spent time talking to them about how they were feeling. The forum on Tuesday was very much focused on how parents can best support their children. There are two very frightening parts to a suicide in the school. One is the suicide of the child and the impact it has on the community, but the other is the potential of a second suicide escalates exponentially. A child who knows another child, or a young man who knows another young man who has committed suicide, is far, far more likely to take that option themselves. It's called contagion. All of our actions, and if you would give me a moment, I would describe the actions of the school post-suicide. There is a second very disturbing component to this, and that is the normalisation of suicide. One of our great fears with the level of press coverage it was receiving was that it just became an option. And if you are depressed and upset and anxious, that something like suicide is a potential outlet. And that also deeply frightened us. So our actions, and I apologise if these were in any way perceived as being disrespectful to Liam's memory or suggesting in any way that Liam was mentally ill, were completely focused back in on our community and front and centre in the way we do everything, our children. We knew from the moment of Liam's fall, even when he was in hospital, that we would need significant counselling. Mrs. Madamba has alluded to the fact of my sensitivity at the hospital, and I reflect on that period of time, and there are things I would have done differently, and again, Mrs. Madamba and Mr. Madamba, I apologise for any insensitivity I showed. I obviously came over as distracted when I was at the hospital. It was because I was trying to locate additional counselling for the school, because we knew we were in crisis situation. I think that was misinterpreted, and I think in retrospect I should have delegated that task and gone to the hospital without having to go through that process. My comments to Mrs. Madamba were only meant to be ones that allowed a comment to be made to our society, our community. We had at 10:40 our students, year 12 and 13s, were gathered and informed that Liam had died, and at 10:45 our year 13 went into a crisis counselling session. Those students remained in crisis counselling for the rest of the day. We also received additional counselling help from ISM. Our initial counselling help was from In Touch. They arrived at 11 o'clock. They were delegated into the lower half of the library, where they worked with Mr. Perosa. We have a number of students at the school we recognise as being at risk, and several students in Liam's year group who we know were at risk prior to the incident occurring, so their risk levels became significantly heightened. Our greatest fear was for the well-being at that time of our existing students, and we tried to act as respectively as we could. Counselling continued right the way through the day. The lower part of the library was set up. We went into the weekend. We had a drop-in centre with counsellors and support. The following week, Year 13s continued with their crisis counselling, either small groups or large groups. On Tuesday, students began to return to class, so I won't continue to read. But the forum was full of incredibly anxious parents, some of whom desperately wanted to know what happened, as we are talking about now. One of the things we are very clear about at BSM is student confidentiality. We do not talk about students. We have at all times attempted not to use student names over the last few months. We feel that is the business of the students themselves and the families of the students, not the wider community. So we were really unable to talk to those students. But we were able to, and I think this was possibly the most important part of the meeting, talk to people about how they can best support their children, how they can best get alongside their children, and correctly Miss Olds posted information on the website that allowed people access to that information who were not at the forum and or who possibly got into a crisis situation. Details for particularly using In Touch. Students were provided with that information. Rod, I know, went out of his way to deal with any students we felt were at high risk, even if they were not in Liam's year. And really we put together as a community of teachers. We had everybody in the staff room and we made it very clear that extra vigilance was absolutely critical and continues to be critical at school. This is not going away. This is something we are very fearful about. So those were the actions, and if they were misinterpreted, we apologise.
Now can we get to the handling of the report, the independent review panel report that your school undertook? Not so much as to the. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. My apologies. I did.
By Miss Mann. Okay. After you learned of what happened to Liam, did you ever ask the other students what exactly happened?
Obviously the statement came from a dialogue. That dialogue was conducted by two teachers that student felt very comfortable with, one of which is in this room. We have to recognise that student was distraught, and she was very anxious, and we tried to make that as non-threatening and as comfortable for her. We already shared in group counselling what had gone on in that room with her peers. It concurred with Mrs. Mann's statement, so we were comfortable that we were not talking at two different ends of the same conversation. We have, as much as possible, kept that student in as normal a school situation as possible. So after the statement was taken, we've really left her to grieve, to go through her processes and to resume her studies when she felt fit.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, this is not the last hearing. Am I correct? There'll be more hearings. So I'll leave it at that first. Thank you.
Well, with that information, I shall do the same. Perhaps at the next one, we would just like to pursue the handling of the report and why it was abridged, and why did Mr. Chua feel the need to disown the abridged and edited report, and also how it took so long for Mrs. Madamba to get a copy of. Do you have a copy of the report? Up to now, that not having received a copy of the report. Those I would just like to put it out there so that we can reflect on it. School
as on. How do I say it? I'm putting it onto the record.
All right. Thank you. Please submit it. Comsec.
Mr. Senators, hello. May I submit also the letter from teachers and staff with about 151 signatures supporting the school?
You may submit, yes, please.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, as well, I believe that one of our families wished to speak as well.
Trixie, come here.
It's open
here. It started working again. Sorry.
It's all right. I am
Trixie White and parent at PSM. I would like to submit some documents of 547 parents who've signed support for the school. I've also have here documents from past heads of school supporting the school, and some documents coming from students of our school. I'd like to put that on record if possible, submit it to the Senate.
Surely. Would you state your name again for the record?
I'm Trixie White, Trixie Limbo White. Okay. I'm a parent of BSM. I have.
And these are documents in support of the school.
That's right. And
why do you need? Why do you feel you need to submit documents in support of the school? The school is not on trial here.
Right. We would like to, if I may, can I just
Have you been given the impression that the school is on trial?
No. I just wanted to send, can I read the letter in front,
Sure.
the cover letter?
As long as it's less than one page.
Yes, thank goodness. Dear Senate Education Committee, we are parents of children enrolled at the British School Manila, BSM. We made the decision to send our children to BSM because we considered it to be an excellent institution which would nurture our children to their full potential. We remain our children to their full potential. We remain and reiterate our support relating to the tragic and utterly devastating death of BSM student Leah Madamba. His sudden passing has been a very difficult and important issue for all of BSM. There is no way anyone could have responded well to such a tragedy, but the school handled it with the prudence and care that we demand of all those who care for our children. We continue to entrust the care of our children to the administration that our children are in good hands. Concerned that the continuing public discussion of these matters is contrary to public interest in this matter, may we be parents of BSM.
Thank you. That is precisely why, to make sure that it won't happen, minimize the chances of their happening again. Otherwise, wasting so much of our time doing this. We're certainly not after any person. Yes. See, there's about 50 of you here, and I'm sure hundreds more would have wanted to come. And we're doing this for you. We have the Undersecretary of Education here, and he's taking note of everything that's being said. But we do have concerns that have been raised by other parties, and we're hopeful that you will understand that unless we finish this, we can't just sweep it under the rug, because later on it'll come back to haunt us. And we would have said, why didn't we finish what we started? We're not out to bring down the name of British School. Definitely not. I've already said in the beginning that it's a very fine institution and perhaps the most expensive in the country. Maybe the politician can temper their tuition fees, and I'm sure Mr. Attorney Bautista can afford a lower fees, and I'm sure Mr. Attorney Bautista can afford a lower. Yes, he can do it pro bono. But yeah, no, we're doing this for the Filipino people. We're doing this for the nation. That's why we have to dig deeper. Feel free, any parent, to call the office if you have questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, I have some follow-up questions. Did you want to ask? Okay. What we're trying to find out here, Mr. Buley, Mr. Mann, is what did the teacher say to trigger that kind of reaction? Obviously, we can't answer that now. Liam's gone, and Isabella is too scared to come before the hearing, and we're certainly maybe talk to her in private, but that's not going to mean much unless her testimony is recorded. But there are some commonalities. One, they both got hysterical. So Miss Natalie Mann must have said or done something to create such hysterics. In the words of Mr. Mann, you said upset. Isabella was upset to the point, and this is admitted by her mother, that her mother had to slap her because she was about to take some sleeping pills. She was suicidal. Unfortunately, in the case of Liam, the mother didn't notice any such overt behavior, and Liam quietly and did it in his own quiet way because he's a very introverted person. He walked from, what's the village? Magallanes village all the way to Legazpi village. Probably spent 6 hours. You think he spent 6 hours on wandering around?
Yes, wandering around. Some guards who do 24-hour survey, I mean, you know, when they did notice a handsome young man walking around the wee hours that morning.
So, you know, he was
February 6.
walking around, and finally at 6 o'clock in the morning, I think,
yes, past 6 o'clock, he jumped.
he made the decision to jump. Now, those are the commonalities. Both kids became hysterical. What happened? We don't know because, of course, we don't expect Natalie Mann to testify against herself. But that is what we would have wanted or expected British school to do. Something happened, we're going to advise the teacher from now on, be very careful because certain kids are more sensitive than others. Something happened, we're going to advise the teacher from now on, be very careful. Let's say you'll go in one ear, out the other, and they will forget that we ever lectured them. And I think parents here all have so sensitive that why? I mean, such a wasted life, so full of promise. He was going for honors, I understand, with the IB exam. And why would anybody do that? Something must have triggered that. Now, we're not out to put missions, I understand, with the IB exam. And why do that? To find out what she might have said so that we can tell teachers, don't go this. I mean, give them a slap in the wrist, for goodness sake. They're only 16, 17, 18 years old. You don't want your children summa cum laude or high honors. That's gone. You're not even going to pass the IB. Now, for example, Mr. Mann, tell me, the essay, TOK, which is theory of knowledge, am I correct, will form how many % of the final grade in an IB program?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, could I defer that question to Mr. Platt?
Mr. Platt.
Okay, so the TOK is part of what we call the core, which is combined with the EE, the extended essay. That will give you a combined total of 3 points. The total, the maximum amount of points you can get is 40,
maximum of?
Is 45. So it's
45.
If you're going to take half and half, it's 1.5 to 2 points out of 45.
Okay, it's 1.5 to 2 points. All right. And that might have been a substantial portion of his final grade?
I'm not a mathematician. 2%?
No, what I'm saying is that while I'm not too sure what the rules are, giving somebody 2 hours to write an essay, which to me is pretty difficult. I couldn't even begin to write one page.
Where we had launched the TOK, students would have had October, November, December, January and February of their TOK teacher to give written and verbal feedback on that essay. As we also heard earlier, we were breaking up for half term. That feedback needed to be given before students went away for half term. So the essay, Liam would have had Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to further prepare for that essay, hand it in get feedback from that essay, so it could then be written.
Time to write an essay.
As I said, there were time
To
constraints.
write a good essay. And I'm not even talking about research. Just pure writing.
As I've said, we
like
were
an English exam.
In the process has been going on since October, in terms of researching and unpacking titles. But I do agree it's a short time period, but that would have then been Liam would have been able to.
Now,
Liam would have been able to.
Now,
she didn't read it on that day. She read it subsequently.
She read it a couple of days. She had read.
Discussed.
Yes, and maybe that should be part of the quote-unquote solutions that you tell your teachers now. I mean, if you see something like this, I mean, if you have a student write a letter of reflection, read it immediately, and sometimes you will see instances of deviant behavior or a reaction that is out of line and far in excess of what maybe a scolding or a warning would have warned. What did British school authorities learn? How have they revised their instructions to the teachers so that at least you can't? What did British school authorities learn? And we would like to see that report from you. Which February 6.
Yeah.
So you've had sufficient time for
Sorry, Senator. Some of the things you've described have already been covered. Other things we are responding to that take a little longer, which is the drafting of things like behaviour policy, the redraft unity. Basic actions such as process of reflection, making sure reflection processes are read and understood by the teachers, have already been put into place. I can assure you that will be continuing at the moment place. I can assure you that we will not be continuing at the moment. That is already in actions, as I say, takes a little longer because they will engagement with our community to discuss
meetings that were submitted to us. The students were threatened by two things, which to my mind would be quite devastating. One, I had classmates like Liam, and it would have ended their future. They would say, I'm gone, I'm done for, I'm never going to make it in life. So we would like to know and learn from British school how they intend to do that. There have been instances of your stonewalling this, and we will discuss that at the next hearing. And we will discuss that at the next hearing. Report, and that's what triggered the whole thing. You would not have had to check out February 2 to 5 if February 6 hadn't happened. There would have been no need to that. Not only from British parent. Yes, on the second.
Comments for the next hearing, Mr. Chairman. Can also be furnished a copy of the two folders that were submitted by BSM to the committee, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Copies of the.
Yes, Senator. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Subject to the discretion of the committee, because, as I indicated earlier on, there are documents that are very sensitive as far as student confidentiality is concerned. Of course, we defer to the direction of the committee, but that and with that
anybody else.
But I'm just saying that as we do have information that is confidential to students within those documents, that we are happy to furnish all the documents to the Department of Education that were passed to this Senate hearing, but just on the understanding that even with our transmission of documents to the Senate, we did indicate we're of that nature, and we
Board of Governors who have been sitting here so patiently the last 3 hours, do they have any reaction? Do they want to say anything? Ms. Henderson? No? Mr. Belspo? Ms. Haslam? Mr. Turner, you've spoken. Mr. Peñalosa has spoken. Ms. Melrose? No? Ms. Daniels? No? All right, on this side, will you come to the next hearing? All right. Without further ado, this hearing is suspended. Thank you all for coming. All right. Without further ado, this hearing is suspended. Huh?
What's our strategy?
Huh?
What's our strategy?
Gumaganti sila.